Hello fellow hobbyists, I'm Jason and this is Level Up Hobbies. Now today you're joining me for part 2 of my Dark Angels Deathwing Lieutenant Kitbash. And in this one, I'm painting the guy up. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and start painting and I will see you at the end. Later.
Okay, so to begin, we're just gonna go ahead and prime this guy in black. I used Pro Acryl's black primer, but you can use, whichever one of your choice. And we just want to make sure we have a nice, smooth base coat to start layering colors up on top of with this. So go ahead and get that on there. And since this guy is going to be a Deathwing Lieutenant, he's going to have bone white armor. So instead of working up from black, what I'm going to do is go ahead and lay down a mid-tone of a warm gray at this point. I'm going to keep this kind of up high. I want to leave that black down in the shadows and just have some good transition from that black shadows all the way up into the lighter armor color. Now you could actually just start off with that gray base coat, but I really wanted to have those shadows present. So that's why I went with the black and then building up lighter colors on top of that. And now we move right into that first armor color. For this I chose Pro Acryl's Ivory. I went this direction other than say like Screaming Skull or something just because it is a lot lighter and it doesn't give me that as much of a brown feel when I look at it. This going over that gray is going to give me kind of a light beige feel instead of working up from the browns like that you traditionally see with the Deathwing. And now once that's all down, I move on to the next color for the armor, and this is going to be light ivory from Pro Acryl. I spray this on at a higher angle just so I make sure I have those transitions going from the shadows up into these higher upper highlights. Now at this point, I pick out some details to base coat in black. Some of these will remain black, and some of these I will work other colors up from that. Now I start working on the color for the tabard here. I want to kind of portray the idea of texture on this fabric. So I mix up a 50-50 of black and black green, and I just start doing like little hatches and dots and dashes just on the folds of the material here. And I just work that from not all the way in the shadows, but about halfway up onto the highest points of the fabric. And I just build that up over time to where the color gradually builds up and just layers on top of each other. Now, when I'm happy with that first layer, I go to straight black green and I do the same thing. I just start layering that up using hatches and dots. Um, and I continue to build that color up. So you're going to get this like texture pattern coming from the shadows and then rising up over that crest of the fold. And once you work at it and just really start building up that color, it gives you a great effect. And then from there, I move into a 50-50 mix of the black green and then faded green, both by Pro Acryl. And again, actually at this point, I'm just doing stippling. And I'm kind of giving that first highlight layer and building up just a slight variation coming from that black green into a more highlight from that. And to finish it off, I use faded green to give a final highlight. And again, I'm just going to stipple this very gradually, building up that highlight. I don't want a solid line running straight down the tabard. I want this to kind of coincide with those hatches and dots and everything that I've been layering up from that black. Now it's time to pick out some details around the model. All of these basically his belt and any of the accessories hanging from it, I paint in mahogany from Pro Acryl, which is very similar to Rhinox hide. It's kind of a cool brown, almost got like a purplish magenta kind of undertone to it. Um, and yeah, so I pick out the details around his belt to paint that. This takes a couple coats. It um, is kind of splotchy, so I make sure it's nice and thin, and then just layer it on, build up that color until I'm happy with it. And now it's time to pick out details that I'm going to be painting red. Um, just various details across the model. Obviously here, the symbol of the Deathwing on his shoulder pauldron. This is actually a Mark III pauldron that I pulled from Forge World. And I chose this because I think it signifies the importance of this character having a piece of equipment that dates back over 10,000 years. So I chose this to incorporate into the model because I like that old school feel of it and everything. So, but yeah, so pick out a few details. I tried not to go overboard on the red because I really didn't want this model to turn out and look like it's some type of Christmas marine. So that's a very fine line that you can very easily go over if you don't pay attention. Now I go in and I hit all of the red with Agrax Earthshade just to really make those details pop out a little bit more and emphasize like the shadows. Once this is dry, I'm going to go back in with that burnt red and build that base color back up before I start highlighting. I finished the red off with a highlight of bold pyrrole red, just hitting the upper edges and just kind of make that red pop just a little bit more. And now I just started to work up some details here, like the tilting plate. And for this, I bisect it with some black green on the bottom, and then I take one of the top quarters and I split that in half with some checker patterns. And that's all laid out behind the red veteran sword. For the wings on the chest emblem, I use some Wraithbone base and just give it a nice coat of that. And then I wash it with some Skeleton Horde contrast paint. After that, I will highlight it back up again with the Wraithbone and then do some extreme highlights with just a white. I begin picking out details throughout the model that I want to make metallic. And instead of gold, I always feel like bronze just looks a little bit more natural with the Dark Angels color tones. So here I go with some bronzes, and then I'll lay in some golds. Mostly I stick with bronze and then a silver metallic. And on this model, I decided to give him the Crux Terminatus honors for his veteran status. And for this, I added some colors. I used gray for the main part of the emblem, and then I used Iron Warriors for the skull and bones that cross it. And now I'm working on details of the battle standard here. I used black for the fabric that hangs, and then I used Xandru dust as a base color for the skull and also the ribbon that runs across it. Now I'm going in with some camo green to work up the laurels that wrap around the edges of this. And finally, I go in and I add the crossed swords of the Deathwing, a transfer from the Forge World, I guess just the Games Workshop, Dark Angels transfer sheet. Now I go in and I give the entire model a generous coat of gloss varnish just to lock in all of this work that I've done now. And from here, I'm going to do some pin washes and then we'll move up to highlights for most of the model. Now I take some Wildwood contrast paint and I thin that by about 50% with a contrast medium. Then I just use this as a pin wash and wash it through all of the panel lines throughout the armor. And then I wash it also over all of the leather and then also metallic bits over the entire model. The nice thing about this, once you thin it with that contrast medium, if it's not dark enough, just go back over it a second time and just give it a second line and it'll darken up your shadow details. Now it's time to add some highlights to the armor here. And for this, I'm going back to that bright ivory that I used for the spray over highlight. And I'm just going to do a line highlight over all of the armor panels, um, all of the rivets, anything that's going to catch, a glint of light. I'm going to do a line highlight on that. At this point, I go in with Pro Acryl's white gold, and I start highlighting in all of those bronze details that I painted earlier. If you want to use something similar, you could use any type of silver, or if you wanted to go more of a bronze route, you could go like Sycorax bronze or even Canoptic alloy for GW colors. I build up the base color of Xandri Dust back up from that wash that I did earlier, and then I follow it up with a highlight of Screaming Skull on both the little banner and then also the skull. Now I punch up the highlights on the laurels with some bright yellow green from Pro Acryl. And now I start working up the base because I really want to get this guy mounted. So for the architectural plate on the ground, the ruin, I paint it Corax white. And then the gravel, I just painted a dark brown. I think I used the equivalent of Rhinox hide. And then the stone, I painted it a dark purple or Nagaroth Night for GW colors. And I chose that color because throughout my Dark Angels army, I have white architecture on the bases, and then the violet, dark violet stones and gravel, like rock, like that. So this just ties into my overall army scheme with this. Now, once all that was all dry, I made a brown wash out of some ink, and I just covered the entire base with this, picking up any that pooled anywhere that I didn't want, excess, like on that white panel. After that's dry, I followed it up with a dry brush of Xandri Dust and then Screaming Skull on the gravel. And then on the purple stone or the violet stone, I used Pro Acryl's Plum, and then I finished it off with a dry brush of Ghost Gray from Vallejo. And now that the base is done, I mount the model using some super glue and a pin, and then I give it a victory lap around the base with some black paint. And the base is done, model is mounted. Last thing I need to do is paint the glow effect on the gun. So I started off with a nice base coat of Corax White, and then I topped that off with a generous portion of Bad Moon Yellow contrast paint. You want to get this all over. It's okay if you get it on the edges a little bit. It just kind of adds to a little bit of the glow effect coming off of that yellow. Next, I paint the coils of the gun a orange from Pro Acryl, and then I also do kind of a glaze along the edges of the metal, just to add a little bit more to the glow. Now I follow that up with a very thin layer of Scrag Brown, also on the coils, except I bring this up a little bit higher. So you're going from the bright glow at the bottom, and it's darkening as you go up the coil. And then also around the edges of the gun where the coils are exposed. Next, I mix a little bit of Corvus Black in with that Scrag Brown. And again, I'm just painting the coils and the edges of the gun. And I just bring that up a little bit higher on those coils. And to finish that part off, I go with Substrate Corvus Black, which is more of a charcoal gray. And I finish off those coils, just getting the uppermost edges of them. And I bring that down into it just to darken up those coils a little bit so the glow looks like it's behind them. And I finish off this Volkite with a thin pin wash of white oil paint. Um, I try to keep this thick enough that the white doesn't just kind of dissipate. If you get it too thin, it'll just kind of disappear in the whole thing. Um, but I just, flood this in here, let it dry. If I need it to brighten up a little bit, I'll just give it a little bit more. And here we have the completed model. This was a very fun model to paint. Um, Being a Dark Angels player, uh, to be honest, I haven't painted much of my Deathwing. I have, I think, one completed unit of Deathwing Terminators. And that's it. I mean, I've got a ton of them, a ton built. I just never painted them because I was kind of intimidated by the white paint scheme. Um, but this was kind of feels like a fresh look on it. I know if you look around, um, I'm sure other people have converted their lieutenants or, their other guys in the same manner or similar manner. So it's not super original, but it's original for me. And that's all I care about. I mean, it's going to look great in my army, and I would be happy to have him in there with, unit of my Terminators or, my the sword veterans. So yeah, and here he is compared to an original Blade Guard veteran. I said sword veteran, but Blade Guard veteran. Um, and I don't know. I think it just it's hard to explain. Like I think it just excels or just takes that Blade Guard veteran look and really takes it a step up into more of that knightly feel from old school Dark Angels. So yeah, hopefully this video helped you out, get some ideas. or just entertainment, whatever. But yeah, this was definitely fun to build and to paint. Sorry it was so long. It was 2 videos, like 20 minutes each. So, but yeah, this guy actually didn't take too long to paint. I think he took about 12, 3 hours, maybe a little over 3 hours, start to finish. So that's not too bad. Not fast, but definitely not the slowest I've done. But yeah, thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time. All right, later.
Hey guys, thanks again for joining me here on Level Up Hobbies as I painted my Kitbashed Dark Angels Deathwing Lieutenant. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a like down below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you can be notified whenever I publish new videos. Thanks again, and remember, build, paint, and play tabletop games. Later, guys.